He's like listening to me, be like, not yet.
Yep,
Oh,
it's
is
ready.
this, so
Go
is
ahead.
this live?
Yep.
All right, what are we even calling this?
Do we have an agenda?
I don't have an
Land's
agenda.
presentation.
No, not
by-
officially.
It's okay.
It's
Monroe.
very informal. Special meeting of the.
All right,
Yeah.
welcome to the special meeting of the Conservation Commission. We have a presentee, Anna Boudreau, from the Dover Open Lands Committee to do a presentation for us.
Great. Well,
Welcome.
Thank you. I was going to do a presentation, because I do a lot of workshops, you know, that, I've done one at the NHACC meeting, the Saving Special Places over the years for, in my work as a consultant for land conservation for towns. And there's so many topics, so rather than bring a PowerPoint and go through each slide, I thought it might be better to go over exactly, so what is it you guys want to know about? Because I was the founding member of the Dover Open Lands Committee in 1999. Well, actually, the city voters approved our committee in 2000. Spent a year kind of hashing things out, and have learned a lot of things along the way by trial and error, and then a little more error, and have been successful over the years. But so that's one thing. Like, how did we get started? You were talking about criteria. How do you pick a property? I don't know. I did ask, like, how much land is conserved in Portsmouth, and how much more do you have to go? Another topic might be, okay, so if a landowner, you hear about a landowner through the grapevine, or they call, how do you, what's the first step? What do you say? What don't you say? And then any other topics you might have in mind. So I guess I'll ask you all, what is it you want to, what's the priority that you want to hear about today?
I don't think we have a lot of people or any landowners that come to us. Am I wrong, saying
Not
I
very
might be
often.
open
Yeah.
to something?
Right.
We've had a couple.
We've had a couple, but it's not common. Yeah.
So I guess
Okay.
we usually, or what we've done is we've looked at parcels that we would like to conserve without any knowledge of whether the landowner would even be
Interested.
receptive.
Ah.
And it's not really panned out. But we don't, I don't know, I mean,
Yeah.
we also don't really have a
So you
lot
don't
of.
have a process.
We don't really have a process. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we didn't really have a process.
We've had
afterwards, but
processes
we
that
had a
are,
process
that
for-
start, but there's not an ongoing process.
Yeah.
So it seems like the time I've been here, we've had several efforts where we look for lands that might be available, do different outreach attempts. Usually we don't hear back from anybody. If we do, we follow up in a kind of an ad hoc way. So I think the thought is, you know, is there a better process? And given
Right.
we don't get a lot of people coming towards us, it probably is more of that outreach as a starting point. But
And we-
As a relatively new member of the commission,
Yeah.
what can we do about conserving land? Is there a budget? Is there a target for something like that in the town? Or is it just something, oh, somebody's reached out to us, let's see if we can purchase this land and put it into conservation? So how does it
a
work?
lot of it has been that, but to answer the other part of the question is, conservation commissions in general are charged with overseeing the conservation lands in the community, and really reviewing wetland permits. And the wetland permits seems to take out the bulk of the business.
Yes.
Mhm.
And in Portsmouth, there's just a conservation commission. In Dover, they have a separate open lands committee that kind of sprung out of the conservation commission, or was created.
Yes, because they asked me to join the Conservation Commission. I sat in the meeting saying, you're right, wetlands permits, dredging, I want to put a
Yeah.
dock. And I was like, this is not really what I want to do. And I had gone through the extension natural resources steward training and learned about land conservation. I said, I'd rather focus on protecting the water supply, not just, protecting water supply, wildlife. So we decided to have a subcommittee be created just to work on land conservation. And we spent the first 6 months saying, okay, so what is it we're trying to conserve?
Mhm.
And, the folks that were friends with the farmers, there used to be more farms, agricultural land, and supporting, farming. Others, I live on the river, we have like 4 rivers in Dover, the riparian zone and others, so it was like it was bloody, we fought it out for a number of months. and decided to come up with a ranking form, like, if the criterion exists, it gets a 3. If it doesn't, it gets a 0. And then there was 1 and 2 for some variations thereon. But first we had to determine what is it we're trying to protect. The Forest Society likes to protect forests. Nature Conservancy, it's wildlands for wildlife. But we're in an urban area that really, the forever wild easements didn't work. But we did do outreach. That was the first thing we did. We determined what we were trying to conserve, what were our bylaws, what is it we're trying to do? And then did several workshops, estate planning for landowners. Back then, there were families losing their land and their farms literally because of the tax implications. They were much higher, and they would have to sell the farm to pay off the state taxes. That's not so much the case now, but that's what got me interested in it. And there is, you do the outreach events, you might have a workshop, or you might have a meet and greet at a farm, where people can not be targeted, they can kind of listen carefully. And follow-up is very critical, but I found that we did them over the years, and after 5, 10 years, I remember this one elderly man, he came 10 years after I first did a presentation with the stacks of all the little brochures and flyers that now he was ready. So even if you're ready, they're not always ready. And then sometimes when the landowner's ready, you don't have any money, or you're not ready.
Yeah.
Do you have a conservation fund balance?
Yeah, I was gonna explain that part too, because it doesn't sound like you've heard about that. But the city has a fund, and it's called the Conservation Fund, and money's put there, which is basically there's a current use tax category, so a lower tax category. If you have, I think it's 10 acres and you aren't using it for development, you could pay a really low tax rate on that land. If you take it out of that land and like build a subdivision on your property and build it that way, there's a penalty of 10% of the value of the property that you took out of current use. So they look at the property, the assessor looks at the value of the property, and then say it's a $1 million property, there's a 10% penalty. And the state says that the community can put that into a conservation fund, a percentage, all or some percentage of it into a conservation fund. Portsmouth voted, I don't know when, probably before 2000, to put all of that proceeds into a conservation fund. So that fund accumulates as properties come out of current use, as developments happen that were in current use. And then that money can be used for conservation with the recommendation of the Conservation Commission and the approval of the City Council. So if, through the processes that Anna describes, you decide you want to put something in conservation as a commission, and the landowner is willing, and you end up trying to make a deal with them, then the next step would be, we'd like to go ahead and spend X number of dollars out of the Conservation Fund and then take it to the City Council, and they'd have to approve it ultimately. So that's the whole process, basically, how it works.
Right.
And then we also have a set aside from the CIP too.
And then recently, we started adding money to that fund from the capital improvement plan and the budget, ultimately, the city budget, to try to boost that fund up, because at some point, that fund is not gonna be added to much,
Not too many people
as
have
everything's
over 10
developed.
acres of
Right.
land in Portsmouth.
Not a lot of big land holdings left, so.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
also do outside funding, right?
And then
Try to get
outside funding, we can do grants, we do grants a lot, and the conservation fund,
Well-
what my thought has always been is, try not to use the whole project on conservation fund money, try to get a grant, so match it with your conservation fund money to make it go further. And we've done that successfully a bunch of times. I guess what was the other thing I was gonna say? Oh, the only other thing I'd say is in terms of the prioritization, there hasn't been an effort by the Conservation Commission to prioritize, but there has been an effort with maybe input from the Conservation Commission to an open space plan that came up with a set of properties that the commission has looked at.
Right.
Is sort of, it was a starting point for a couple efforts, but.
Right.
Yeah, and we kind of scored them and what we thought was the most important,
Yeah, went
based
through
on
it.
some of the things that you
Right,
probably might be
right.
talking about.
Gotta speak into the mic, people. I'm just
Oh.
getting the signal from
I was going to mention, I remember when we were speaking on the phone or Zoom or whatever, you mentioned, oh yeah, well, we don't have a prioritization criteria of selection form, but we did prioritize and identify some properties. And I would just caution you there, for a number of reasons, you shouldn't have a public document that says, we're looking for James Smith's farm, we want to conserve it. So, one, it's kind of private for their financials until such time that it goes public and you're asking the Conservation Commission, you go to public hearing to expend the funds. It's not good to list the actual lot numbers, and you're not the first organization that's done that, or first city that's done that. It's good to have like swaths, if you will, like we're trying to protect land near the drinking water supply, where we're trying to protect land in this area. It could make well, I shouldn't, I don't have to list the reasons why you shouldn't, but I would just caution that. But so, at least that's a start. And if you went back to that list, they may or may not be available anymore, probably right now. What we did in Dover in 2000s, I think we took a citywide view of like 10 acres and over in Dover, and then prioritized them, and held the workshops. We did like 3 or 4. It was a lot of work. Everything from estate planning and land conservation to, I think we had Randall Arendt, the developer who back then did open space subdivisions, come and speak. And we had developers there, because we don't want, there's got to be a balance. We don't want developers to be like the bad guy, especially right now with housing being such a critical issue. I often try to, do you have TDRs, to transfer development rights?
We do not.
About 15 years ago, I brought the idea of TDRs to the city planning department in Dover, and I wrote an abysmal draft. It was horrible, but they're like, they didn't look at it. They looked at it 5 years later, tried to do it 5 years later. They just passed it. And now, if the developer gets increased density, could put more homes and more, or apartments or units on the property, and then they pay into the conservation fund. We get the money goes to our conservation fund.
You call that a
Transfer of development rights. So they transfer the rights from, we give them more rights and more density in like infill in the city, and then they, normally if in that zoning area, they can only put, 5 units, say.
Yeah.
And they ask for 2 extra. So they're gonna make more money and get 2 more units in a crisis right now with housing, and then he pays a fee to the conservation fund in return for that density bonus. So.
Is that calculated in the ordinance, or how did they come up with the numbers?
I'm not sure. You'd have to ask Jackson.
Okay, we can do that. Yeah, we can look up the
yeah.
ordinance. I know they've used it at least once, more than once, I don't know.
Oh, more than once.
More than once?
Every month at my Open Lands Committee, I get a treasurer's report, and I was like, wow, where did this come in? And it's from different developments that have gone in. And the city of Dover is really trying to do a lot of infill in the urban core, and not so much on the outskirts, but even
But
then.
they can do it anywhere in the city it applies? Is
I
it-
think there are receiving zones and giving zones, and I'm not privy to all those because I'm not on the planning board, although I'm before them frequently.
Well, that might be a subject for a future meeting.
Yeah, but I mean, it did take, at the time, it wasn't that well-known, so it did take about 15 years, but now that it's more well-known and city planning, Dover planning knows more about it, it might go through a little quicker. I noticed zoning changes it takes a lot to get them changed.
Do they have the option to give land as well, or just give money into the fund?
Land? I've never heard of a
Like, can
developer
they
being,
give?
Yeah, that's
use
what-
money?
well, on an open space subdivision, that's what
Right.
that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you have the,
Okay.
10%.
10-acre lot, and you put all the houses in one corner, and then you
Right.
leave the rest as conservation land. So in a sense, that's giving land, if you will. But that's not connected to the.
You
T-
already have that.
And you already
already
have that,
at
yeah,
Dover,
yeah.
And we have an open space subdivision as well.
Right, right.
But the idea of priorities, when we apply for grant funds, we often are able to pull supporting information from our master plan or from the open space plan, but it would be a nice idea to have, maybe a set of priorities somewhere. And maybe
Right.
it goes into the next master plan, the open space priorities, and have that listed.
Right.
But it probably goes well with your grant applications.
It goes well with the grant application, because I always try to leverage the money that's in the conservation fund.
Right.
Sometimes we have just, the whole thing was paid from the conservation fund. For whatever reason, there's no particular grant
Yep.
that fits that particular property. But it also helps going before the city council. They don't approve the funding, but they approve holding the interest in the conservation easement.
Oh.
And they're like, so why are we spending $350,000 out of the conservation fund? And we list our criterion with, why it's important and how it benefits the public, even if no one ever walks on it. That's another thing. A lot of folks have the misconception that conservation land means it's public, and there's trails, and that's not always the case. And that takes some education at the very beginning, whether it's a landowner or a funding source or the public. There are some properties, the landowner, they historically allow hunting, trails go through there. They're like, we're not going to close that down. We're not going to post it, but we're not going to put them on the Dover Community Trail map unless it's appropriate to do so. A lot of times, like when I'm before selectmen or city council, they want to know, so are we getting public access? And actually, public access is awesome. I think it's terrific. But as the easement monitor, it's a liability, because it's got to be something I can monitor, and we're only out there once a year on each property. So if you conserve a property and it remains in private use, and you just buy the development rights so it's conserved, you as the easement holder have to go out and walk it once a year and make sure everything's copacetic. And so if there's a lot of trash or issues with trails, if we mandated it, then it falls to us to try to fix. So we try not to mandate that and leave that to the landowner to allow it or not allow it. But what was I going to say about, leveraging funds? Oh, the other thing that the scoring sheet or the criteria is good for, it's a good tool for saying no. Sometimes people come to me and they're like, I want to conserve my property, and it's like, it just didn't meet the threshold. And a lot of people think every property that comes to the Open Lands Committee, we grab up. It's
Yeah.
like, nope, I don't want to, the surprise CE, the surprise Superfund site, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. So we do say no to some, and it's a formal way to say thanks, but no thanks. It didn't really meet our criteria. Public funds are limited, et cetera. So, yeah.
And Can you speak a little to, like, on your scoring, that you originally had, like, a pretty large range, and you narrowed it down?
Yeah, did I
Because
copy?
we did some scoring too ourselves, and
Well, what we found was, we had the scoring, I don't know if we have a copy of that one, from,
Is it the
The original one?
criteria rating sheet?
yeah, like 1 to 10 or something like that. And we'd all go, 3 or 4 of us would go out, and I'd give it an 8, and someone else would give it a 5, and it was a 6, and I was like, and it was all over the place. I'm like, oh, and it was more a feeling they got. I'm like, okay, no, it can't be subjective. It either is there or it is not. So we found that the subcommittee that walked the property to rate it and rank it, brought it back to the committee, and it was a mess. It just didn't work. It was too many variables. I don't know if I have a copy of that one. So then we went the other way, 0, 2, and 4, or 6 if it was along the river. Now, it's a little different today. So we would tweak it and go out in the field and say, okay, that's not working. And it also changed over the years because there were different plans that became available. The Wildlife Action Plan, and it was like, oh, it's not just a bunch of volunteers from Dover saying, oh, I want to preserve this pretty property. There were some science behind why we wanted to conserve it. So that helps with funding, grants, and the city council approval and the public hearing. When we're at the public hearing at the Conservation Commission level, we have to explain why it's important. So yeah, oh yeah, here's the current one, I think. It's 023, 023. Sometimes a 1. I don't know, we go over these all the time. We try not to change it too much, because then it's remains difficult to compare projects. It used to be 25 was like the highest, and if something was 15 or over, we were like in. Then we recalculate everything, and it's like 65 was the highest. It's like, oh, how do we translate that? So we haven't changed it. I think it's 3 times we've changed it. And by not giving it so many levels, the scoring is more consistent, less subjective. It's either there or it's not. But we also are human. We go out there, and sometimes there's a aha factor, like, wow, we want to conserve this. So this is just a tool. It mainly also, it was at the time we did the workshops, we did have people calling, and it was like, whoa, careful what you wish for. We don't have the money for all of them, or the capacity. We were all volunteers. And it was like, how do we prioritize? These 3 landowners came to us, which one should we work with first, and the others we kind of keep on the back burner. So that was also helpful to kind of prioritize projects that were running concurrently. So, I don't know if I answered your question about the form, but yeah, it's best not to have 0 to 10. But and this is kind of long here, the notes. That was for the subcommittee that, I think Kristen, do you know Kristen Murphy? She
Yeah.
works in Exeter.
Exeter,
She's my vice chair on the Open Lands Committee. And so this was a lot of her work that she put into it. So a lot of notes, like, what are we referring to anyway? So that people understand what, we can point to a plan or a study or research that was done by other people a lot smarter than me.
Do you have any, did you say 10 acres is your minimum size you try to target?
Well, yeah, 10 acres was what we originally came up with. We have conserved smaller parcels. If someone in the middle of Dover, downtown, with 4 acres comes to us and wants to conserve their property, that's a no. But if there's a 4-acre strip that's connecting, we just did one a couple years ago where the Great Bay, what's that fishing game? I always forget the long name. The Great Bay Wildlife Management Area. It's huge on the Bellamy River. And the city of Dover has some conservation land, and there's some private conservation land, and then we have a trail, and then no more conservation. And there was this one little 4-acre house lot that kind of, people had to like, do we walk around, or what do we do? And had someone talk to her. That's what I was going to get into, is like, how do you get people to talk to you? Somebody knew somebody who knew somebody. It's like, hey, you have the trails here, and would you ever consider? She's like, oh, no, I gave her a little brochure and then checked again, sent her a little note, and then she granted a conservation easement on that 4 acres. So it kind of fills in a little jigsaw piece. That we were interested in. The other 4 acres, no. So we don't really have a minimum in that regard. Some of the open space subdivisions are smaller, but those don't come through the Open Lands Committee. We find out about them the next year when we have to monitor them. It's like, what is this little strip?
Well, there's been times when people have wanted to give conservation land without charging or, asking for any money. Do you guys have any policies with that? Like if someone, either it's a portion of their development that they can't use, or it's wetlands, or, they're like, I just want to get rid of that kind of thing.
Right.
Is what they think of it as, and there's been times where the commission's taken it. It hasn't happened as much recently, but there's been talk of it here and there.
We have had people do that, and we use the exact same criterion. Would we take it whether it's donated or not? Because we don't want something that doesn't really meet that conservation threshold, and if it's not really conservation worthy, it's still work to maintain it or whatever, to keep track of it. We're supposed to be keeping track of all the, all the spreadsheets and the databases and all the conservation land.
Right.
So if it would qualify, if it was, we were paying for it, it should qualify if they were donating it. Sometimes maybe there's another use for it. Someone was donating a little strip in Dover, and I think they're going to instead put apartments. Like, we couldn't use it, but doesn't mean it couldn't be donated for another use. But no, we haven't taken any that didn't meet our threshold, but they have come to us,
Mhm.
donation.
That's good.
We kind of wish we could, but And at the time, I didn't think about that whole, well, why don't they give it to the city and we can use it for something else? I was singularly focused on conservation at the time. So, good questions. And as far as talking to landowners, we did that whole series of workshops, and that kind of died down a little bit. But mostly it was sitting around the Open Lands Committee, or sometimes just a subgroup of us, 3 of us, because if it's a quorum, you're supposed to call a meeting, and identify who knows somebody. And it was more like, oh, I went to school with his brother, and his wife works with, it's just kind of like a friendly conversation. And that is how we've gotten most of the people to come to us. We had one woman that hosted like a little neighborhood, I was going to say cocktail party. She's done that too. But coffee, going to have coffee and donuts, want you to talk about, the Open Lands Committee. And they're like, oh, and people would come. So it's kind of a group, so no one is targeted. And but it's talking to people. But we would identify who knows someone that knows this person. And sometimes if they don't, I would write a letter, as the chair, but when I wasn't the chair, I'd have the chair of the Open Lands Committee write a letter. And can we follow up next week? Because sometimes we didn't have a phone or an email, so you just kind of reach out. And if you can give our contact information. The City of Dover Planning Department is very supportive. And it sounds like you have that relationship here, too. When I first started, I was running around and knocking on the door of the, city planner and the finance guy, and it was like, who's this crazy lady going, I need her, I need a resolution for the city council meeting. How do I do a public hearing? I didn't know what I was doing. So they finally assigned the then GIS intern to me to work and kind of help organize it. It was Chris Parker.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. That's how we started there? That's
Chris
amazing.
Parker, who's now, what is he, the deputy?
Deputy city manager,
Deputy city mayor, manager.
City manager, yeah.
Yeah, but I remind him now and then that so they're like, oh, go take care of this crazy lady. And then they assigned Steve Bird eventually. And Steve Bird and I worked together for 15 years, and that support from the planning department was crucial in our success as a volunteer committee, because there's just so much involved. He handled all the, making sure the resolutions were correct to the city council, or the public hearings were done, or if there was a purchase and sale agreement to enter into with a landowner. Well, before you do that, you have to get an appraisal. What's the value?
Do you always get appraisals?
Yes,
Oh, wow.
absolutely.
And it's a
We did-
conservation value.
Yes, the
appraisal.
before and after value. What is this property worth today if I were going to put if I was going to develop it? And what is this property worth if I removed all the development rights? What's the after value? Before you remove the development rights, after you remove the development rights. And that difference is the value of the conservation easement, and that's what we negotiate. Without that, you can't really negotiate. You talk to them and say, sometimes I would ask them, so, Joe Farmer comes to me through somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. Oh, he heard that you're the chair of the Open Lands Committee. So I would set up a meeting with myself and someone from the city. Usually better to meet at their place. They're more comfortable at their farm and their kitchen table, but sometimes it's at City Hall, and explain the first meeting with landowner agenda. I follow this like to a T, because I know a lot about land conservation. I'll go off on a tangent, so it's best to keep it. I actually take this, and I've learned to take 2 of them, because they're like, can I have a copy of that? They always want a copy. I think even back in 2000, I might have had carbon paper. I've been doing this way too long. And so we explain what land conservation is. What does it really look like? It's not just a 30-day sale, cash sale. I want, $400,000 for my property, and this realtor told me I could get it $1.5 million, and you're off, like, well, you have to kind of temper their enthusiasm and manage their expectations. In fact, I think that was the title of one of my workshops. Managing their expectations and yours, because you want it to move along, but it's city municipal work, it's 1 month at a time. So I go through all of this, and usually the other person takes notes, copious notes, because they're telling you why they love the property, why they, And also in that first meeting, I sometimes try to get a sense of, so you're looking to buy, sell a conservation easement or the property in toto, unloading it. And you probably have a number in mind. Some people are ready to tell me that number right off the bat. Others are like, mostly they're silent on that. They're like, well, just kind of feeling things out. They usually don't tell you in the first. And I let them know, regardless of what number you have in mind, we can't do anything without an IRS qualified appraisal to find out, what does someone else think it's worth? It's, not what I'm willing to pay or what you're willing to sell it for. So we never offer a price, never, ever, in the beginning negotiations, because I'm not an appraiser, I'm not an IRS qualified appraiser. I know kind of what the market's doing, and I have an idea, and I look at the assessment and whatnot. But if they're like, oh, I just want $50,000 to pay off some of my debt, oh, well, we might be able to work with you, but, I can't say yes or no, take it back to the committee. That's one of my main lines. I'm going to take it back to the committee. So I go through all this, and one of the things that we let them know is that it's a long process. Like, what's your timeline? Oh, sometimes the owner is elderly. I'm working with the owner now. She's 85 and not doing well. So I had to tell her son, you might want to put the land in your name or get on the deed. And I talked to her too, and she was okay with it, because I've had the case where the landowner died and everything came to screeching halt, and it did not happen, which is very disappointing. Yeah, so I've tried to get a sense of their timeline, because usually takes, if it's a donation, I don't have to raise the money, 6 to 12 months I could close. 18 months if city council's really busy. If it's grant funding, fundraising, going through the municipal process, it could be 3 years, 18 to 24 months, 3 years. 3 years is quick. So I let them know that up front, and they're like, oh, no way. Tuttle's Farm in Dover was my project, and we had to do that in, Dave helped with that. We had to do that in 3 phases, 3 separate easements, because he needed the money. And, which I probably shouldn't have put on the record, sorry, scratch that. But, so we had to do 1 easement and close, because you can't give them any money until you're closed, and there was DOT money and natural resource conservation, USDA money, fundraising money, so we did 3 easements. And in the end, I think we consolidated them all, and now Southeast Land Trust of New Hampshire holds that easement. But, yeah, it takes a while. It takes a long time. So that first meeting is very critical. That's when you get a sense of they really want to conserve this. They're connected to the land. They're committed. Or she just wants to get top dollar, and I don't think this is going to happen.
Have you already done the criteria rating before you go to that first meeting with them?
So I've done, sometimes, before the, I don't walk it
Yeah.
always, but a lot of this you could do
Yeah.
in-house, I get a sense of the
So you
ranking.
kind of already know that, yes, this is one we would like to
Exactly,
conserve.
yeah. And we walk it after the first meeting. Well, it varies.
Okay.
It's hard to do the walk and the first meeting all on the same day, because they have a lot of questions when they start going, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And it's a lot. The explain the conservation easement thing, it's voluntary definition, that can take a while right there, and I leave them that booklet. I think I brought a copy of it. And I say, you have homework. You have to read this book. Oh, this is my last copy, my table copy. I don't know the size of the parcels that you have left to conserve, but the process is the same whether you're doing 4 acres or 400 acres. That's the thing, the work is the same, unfortunately.
So I've been listening to you, and why would anybody want to do that? I mean, specifically considering the high value of land in
Right.
this area. So is it a case of somebody wants to conserve their land and they come to you to see how they can do that? Or is it a case of, we'd like to conserve this land, and this, how do you convince somebody to do it when they're not in the conservation part?
The latter question, I don't. I don't try to convince someone who's not in the mood to conserve their land. I only work with willing landowners. That should be our first criteria. We only work with willing landowners. I never try to convince someone who's not interested, ever. I might give them information and because someone asked me to, but I probably wouldn't have this first meeting with the landowner. Yeah, I haven't. Have I ever convinced someone that wasn't interested? No, I don't. I only have so much time in my day. I don't waste my time. Sometimes their neighbor will come to me and say, well, I want to learn more. And then 5 years later, I'll get a call from Mr. No, and we'll start. I've done that. Or it's like, oh, they want to see how did it go with my neighbor here. But if I get the sense that it's just, like, why would I do this? I don't know. I'm not interested. I don't. Oh, well, if you ever change your mind and you get another brochure, we're here, or, contact the Open Lands Committee, or when I worked at the Land Trust, I gave my Land Trust card. But so why do people conserve their land? That's what this is for. That's when I get the story, and that's when I'm like, oh my gosh, onions, You get emotional listening to them, why they want to conserve their farm or their lot or on the river. I've been rowing forever, whatever. It's different for every person. Like the lady in Sanbornton, she's got like 1,000 acres. We're working to conserve about 400 of it. And when I go out there for different, forums or whatnot, sometimes we just sit on the deck of the Maple Sugar House, and she'll just tell me the stories of raising her kids there and how Sanbornton, I don't know if you've been there. It's like caught in time, like 100 years ago. It's beautiful. It's like right near Tilton, the malls of Tilton. So people usually come to us, and I ask them, so what is it, what is your goal? And I think one of them, too, is what is your vision for this property? And, well, I don't want to see it developed when I go and my 4 kids start fighting over it, because 3 of them want the money and 1 of them wants to, continue the timber harvesting, because they're not all farms. It's like, oh, I'm making mental notes. Which 3 siblings am I talking to? You almost have to be in sales, or what do you call it? I took behavioral sciences for 3 years and then never graduated, but you're a family therapist, you're everything. But that's a great question, like, why would anyone come to you? Because they want to leave a legacy of, I don't want this beautiful parcel that I've, and some of them are new owners. I moved up from Brooklyn, New York, and struggled in this, and now I have beautiful acreage in Dover or whatever, and I want to make sure it stays this way. Or we've been here for 3 generations, and I don't want to see this chopped up. And then we have to determine whether it's meets the threshold for conservation, and usually it does. But yeah, and they can get money for it. They wouldn't get what they would get if they developed it. If they developed it, like that parcel in Sanbornton, unfortunately, the appraisal was done at the peak of the market, 2022, and it came in at like $1.2 million. Over $1 million for the value of the property if they were to sell it to a developer, and then without the $970 afterwards. So I have to raise $970,000. So it's like, okay, And some people want the full, I need the full 970. The farm is falling apart, the barn is in disrepair, the roof of her house is, I don't think 970 is gonna cut it, but, so then I enter into an agreement with, or the whatever organization, the Open Lands Committee, the city, the land trust that you're working with, enters into a purchase and sale agreement. We agree on, okay, you take it off the market, don't put it on the market, we'll raise the money, and I usually draft it for 3 years. So I do a lot of legal drafting of purchase and sale agreements and conservation easements, which is a whole nother show, Oprah. Yeah. So a long answer to why would people come to you to conserve their land? You'd have to ask them, and they each have a very unique and poignant story.
Thank you.
Do you have any, these all sound like private landowners.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there are parcels in Portsmouth that are owned, I guess, by businesses or LLCs, or like maybe have commercial activity on part of it.
Hmm.
And I guess I don't know how you would approach, I don't feel like they have the land connection that like a
Right.
a homeowner or a private owner would. And I guess they're probably not willing. That's probably what
Yeah.
it comes down to.
You
Maybe
know,
they don't know.
maybe they don't
That's why the
know.
information
Workshops.
session-
If
Yeah,
they could get
workshops
money
are
for it, if
interesting.
they could get money for it.
Yeah, they
um,
might use that money for a part of their business or something.
Yeah. I know I ran into, in one city that will remain nameless, I wanted to conserve some land, but it was zoned commercial.
Mhm.
And I was like, absolutely not, you cannot take any commercial land out of use for, because we have too many houses and not enough, tax base needs to be, so I got shot down by the city itself. It's
How
like,
did they get to have a say in who buys and sells land?
well, they don't, and actually, that was, what year was that, 2008? And there are different people in that city, so I'm not talking to a landowner. Shh. Yeah, they don't really, well, if you're on,
No support.
yeah, if you don't have this, that's why I'm telling you, the support is critical. You don't do this by yourself. Some days it felt like I was doing it by myself, but no, you don't. And you have to read the room and the support that you're going to have. And I always know when I go to the public hearing and the city council, I already know, I don't know the vote. I don't call each one and say, are you voting for this? But I know I'm going to get the vote. I know I'm going to get the approval. Otherwise, I don't go through it.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And like I said, whether you have 4 acres or 400 acres, you have to go through the same legal process. Oh, that's what I was going to say. The one thing that people don't understand, and even board members on land trusts, select boardmen, council members, this is a real estate transaction. They, for whatever reason, and I didn't know that either until I'm like, wait, what are we doing? We're removing the development rights? I didn't understand that. I usually have I didn't bring my pencils. I usually have a bag of a bundle of pencils, that whole bundle of sticks. If you own property, it's like owning a bundle of rights. And one right is enjoyment, another right is trust, you can post it for trespass. Another right is selling it or transferring it. One right is developing it. And if you take that one development pencil and grant it to a land trust or a conservation commission, well, that has some value to it. So most of them want some money for it. That's why, and then I don't say, well, how much do you want for it? We have to have, the IRS says you have to have a qualified appraisal to determine what is that pencil worth. And then the city has to vote. So the Conservation Commission votes to approve the funding. The city votes to approve the you're holding an interest. You're forever going to be married to that property and all that goes with it. So that's one big thing that a lot of folks in leadership roles don't understand. It is a real estate transaction. It's just not your usual private 30-day sale type transaction. A little more complicated, but
Did you guys just overhold most of the easements, or how does it work on that?
Yeah, that was going to
yeah,
ask.
great question. It's a mix. The City of Dover is the primary easement holder, and nobody's a backup interest holder. You can have two, like a backup. Some, Stratford Rivers Conservancy, that was the land trust that merged with Southeast Land Trust. So I was the executive director of Stratford Rivers Conservancy for 10 years. We would work on a project and be the primary easement holders, because we monitor and do all that kind of stuff, and the city would be the backup interest holder, especially if they gave money towards the project. And that also avoids the transfer tax if a municipality or a county or some government agency holds the interest. Some, it's,
Can you
so-
explain that, the transfer tax?
Yeah, if you, you have a private sale, both the buyer, no, is it the buyer? The buyer has to pay a transfer tax. You're transferring the property to another owner, and there's I forget what the transfer tax is. I should know, it's on my HUD statements, my closing statements. It's like 2% for every 1,000 or something.
So that's between two private parties.
Right, right. Or a landowner to a land trust, because that's not a municipality.
Also a transfer tax.
Yes, it's very big. It's a big chunk. That one for 970, so I think that one was gonna be, was it $8,000 or 25,000? I'm getting a couple projects. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
For
Yeah,
adding
no, I
it
don't
to
need
the
to know the
budget.
numbers, just how it works. Yeah.
And it's recorded at the Registry of Deeds. But if a city, or say a Fish and Game, I think, do they count as a state agency?
Yeah.
But if a municipality holds an interest, whether it's primary or secondary, that's waived for some reason. So that's always a
Oh,
plus.
So, yeah, I kind of had a follow-up question,
Yeah.
which was, if the city of Portsmouth purchases land for easement, conservation easement, can they transfer it to Southeast Land Trust, for example? So I guess the answer is yes, but we'd have to pay the transfer tax.
No,
From a
that's a good question.
municipality
I
to a-
think
Municipality to
to a land trust? I don't know that, so you purchase a property, you own it outright, and you want to conserve it. First, you'd have to find out if Southeast Land Trust would conserve it, which
Yeah.
they may not, based on their criteria. But is
Is
there
their
a transfer
criteria going to be
tax?
different?
Yeah.
Pardon?
Their criteria are going to be different? So each...
Yeah, each group is different, yeah. And
Okay.
depending on where they are, and what their capacity at the time, they're like, this is not a good one. Or they might say, oh, we've been looking to conserve this for some time. But I don't know that answer. If a land trust grants an easement to, a municipality grants an easement to a land trust, is there a transfer tax? I don't know. I think because you're a municipality, there would be no, but that's a wild guess. And
What's the deal with, you said there could be like a primary holder and then there's like the backup or secondary?
Yeah, they call it an executory interest holder. So say Tuttle's Farm granted an easement to Stratford Rivers Conservancy. And then Stratford Rivers folded 100 years from now because they were too small and not enough money, and they never merged with Southeast Land Trust. Well, now you don't have it's an orphan easement, and the AG's office has to find an easement grantor and go through it's a nightmare. So it's always good to have a backup listed on the conservation easement deed at the registry. Also, say Stratford Rivers Conservancy got behind in their easement monitor every year because there was a staff of one for 5 years, and maybe that happened. The backup interest holder could say, hey, I didn't get an easement monitoring report. Last year, did you do it yet? Oh, yeah. They kind of keep you,
Yeah. But if the city's the primary, then the city would never fold, I would
right,
assume,
if the
so then there
city's a
wouldn't-
primary
I
easement
guess I
holder,
shouldn't be so sure.
you would hope, right.
Yeah.
But then usually there's not a backup if it's
No, there can be,
municipality.
yeah.
Okay.
In fact, for the Dover ones, I always put Southeast Land Trust as the backup.
And do they have to agree, or is?
No, they don't always take them. Oh, no. No, they don't have to.
But but you can't put their name down unless they agree that they want to be the secondary. the
Correct,
backup.
right.
Okay.
So on the Great Bog, the city bought the fee for the land, and the primary interest holder was the Seacoast Land Trust at the time, but it became the Southeast Land Trust. But the backup for that was Fish and Game, I think.
Probably, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they're still involved.
Southeast Land Trust is still involved, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, Dana, our
Yeah,
former
she's the one who
employer,
did that deal.
she was Seacoast Land Trust
Yeah.
Yeah.
executive director. They merged with Rockingham Land Trust, which became Southeast Land Trust. And then Stratford Rivers, I was 10 years at Stratford Rivers, and then I was like, I'm out of here, this is too hard. And helped with the merger with Southeast, so they have a bigger catchment area. So some of the same parties are still around. We're still kicking.
How long does a conservation easement last? Is it
Forever.
in perpetuity?
Perpetuity,
It's in
usually.
perpetuity, yeah.
I imagine you could put a term on it shorter than that, but I've never seen that.
No, some states do that, we don't here in New Hampshire. And if that was the case, I would be like, nope, what's the point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I would not do it, no. I have had people come, like, they purchase a property that has an easement on it, and we're not very good at this, because there's a lot to it, but there's no mechanism at the registry to notify you of transfer, so, of ownership. So I don't find out till I'm gonna call Lisa, let her know I'm monitoring her property. And they don't live there anymore, it's somebody else. But we go over I try to go over some of this, have like a first landowner meeting with them, let them know what they purchased. And most of them are like, oh, I didn't know that. And
It's not on
they
the-
That's
knew
not
it, they
disclosure.
knew it was,
Not disclosed, yeah.
They
That
knew
should be
it
looked
was-
at in the title search. The
they knew it
attorney
was
should
a
catch it.
Yeah.
conservation land.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But like their realtor didn't like zhuzh it up or explain that you can't put your pool there.
Right.
Jeez.
Garage, I had,
Septic system.
unfortunately, had to have someone move their garage.
Oh, my God.
But I've had attorneys call, it's like, okay, so can I buy this back? It's like, no, you cannot. So it's not, you can't undo it, unless it's by, what is it? Eminent domain, what do you call it when you take back a easement? Like the feds, the federal government or the state comes through and we have to put, an exit 10 or something.
Off the highway.
And then they have, like when 93 was widened, there were little strips of some easements were taken, and they had to reimburse every landowner along the way, and the land trust that held it. So it's a lot of legal stuff, but it's forever. That's why sometimes when people we look at a map, it's like, okay, what do you want to have conserved? And sometimes if it's too close to the house or too close to the barn, or I'm like kind of, let's move it. You don't want us mucking around in your dooryard or whatever, wherever we're at. It's like kind of move it out so that they can do what they want there and maybe start the easement here and go out from there. There's some old easements that a lot of us have, Forest Society, probably Dover, that the whole thing, the house and everything was in the easement. And those old ones are a pain. 'Cause-
Yeah, the Creek Farm, that's the case.
Right, right. Yeah, I was
Where's
just
that?
over there to see Molly. I love that.
On Little Harbor Road?
Yeah.
Down there.
That was a little unique because of the historic house. They wanted to keep the historic house, so. Sometimes
Yeah.
they'll tear the house down, right, as part of the.
Yes, because we're not, land trusts aren't historic society folks, and the money and all that, they don't barely have money just to do all the projects that they have
Yeah.
and maintain their easement monitoring forever. So, I think Jack Savage, they did a good job of navigating that whole thing, but
Yeah. Wasn't easy.
it wasn't easy, and, gosh, are we gonna how do you go to your donors and members that support forestry to say, hey, can you also give us money for, for house restoration?
Yeah.
It's,
Oh,
it's
we got my
tough, but I'm
house.
glad they saved that, because that place is beautiful. So I'm rambling a lot, there's a lot of information, but, what do you want to know?
I was, this is a little side thing, but conflict of interest, like, since somebody is on the Conservation Commission that's also on the Open Lands Committee, right? You have no
Yeah, we
overlap.
have, at least 2 members of the Open Lands Committee that sit on the Conservation Commission. And since we're advisory to the Conservation Commission, there's no conflict of interest. Like, we don't spend the money, we do all the work, and, but we just present the project to the Conservation Commission when we're ready. And by the time we take it to them, they've heard about it from, well, they might have heard, I don't know, I'm not on the Conservation Commission. But they know that by the time it gets to the public hearing, we've done our homework and our due diligence, we know what the heck we're talking about. Same with the city council.
So do they have to approve your recommendation?
The
Concom.
Conservation Commission, you're right. Our recommendation, it goes to the Conservation Commission. And they have to approve that, and they have to approve the funding request. And I learned, this is a little tidbit that I learned early on. If, say, the purchase price back then, I think one of them, it was like $50,000. And then we agreed to pay the survey, because this little old lady had no money to do a survey. And I think we did this appraisal too. So there, it was like, I don't know, say $80,000 in costs that we went to the Conservation Commission for. But someone broke it out into this much for the survey, this was, so then when we did the RFP for the survey, well, everyone seemed to come up right around that price that was posted in the budget. So instead, now we just give a number, you know, we need to raise $100,000, which includes the purchase price and transaction costs. We don't break it out. It was just kind of, I'm like, well, that's weird. Usually the quote, an estimate for an appraisal or a survey ranges, you know, someone might do 5 and or someone might say it's 15,000. And every single one of them was like, just under 10 grand. I'm like, So now we don't list it out unless, like, a city councilor asks for what's the breakout. Or of course, we provide it, but we don't post that in the announcement. What do you call it? Public hearing.
Yeah, public
thing.
notice.
The public notice, thank you. It's just a little thing, like, oh, okay. Note to self.
Right. So the way you do it would avoid any potential conflict. I mean, because we see people come to us with a bigger piece of property and they want to do some development on it. And we're the ones that are saying yes or no to that development as
Oh.
far as a recommendation. So,
I see.
but
Well-
I wouldn't imagine that would happen in Dover as much as it would here where we have.
You mean, so someone on the Conservation Commission sees this development plan come up and they're like, oh, they should, instead of developing
Really
it.
wanted to get that property, you know?
Right, oh, I see. So the other, like, telling the Open Lands Committee, hey, you should call
Yeah.
Jane, they were just here at the planning board.
Yeah, but that wouldn't happen in Dover.
I don't,
It hasn't.
it hasn't happened. I wish it had. I think that might be,
Well, it
is that,
had somebody-
that
We should
sounds like a
talk about
conflict
it,
of
yeah.
interest, but,
Yeah.
that's, no one's ever come to me that way,
Yeah.
like from the Conservation Commission. Yeah, oh, Steve Bird would not allow
I
that.
mean, practical example, we have been looking at a property on the side of Sagamore Creek, and
We're not a non-public, so you probably shouldn't mention what, who, and what, when, and where.
on the edge of Sagamore
But you're looking at a
Creek.
property, considering a
And
property.
a lot of us have mentioned, oh, that would be great, like to have people be able to walk it or to link it up to other public lands, and
So, there's an example. Does anyone know the landowner? Could someone put a bug in their ear? You know, would you consider talking to us? And just, you know, no obligation, you know, just find out what we're doing, what we're about, and you could walk away or not. We'd love to talk to you. And, you know, they may or they may not. It may take more than one try. Like I said, like that old gentleman, it was so funny, that whole stack of little business cards and flyers and whatnot. But it's usually, and if that doesn't work, if no one knows them at all, then a letter or an email or sometimes a letter in the mail. But it's who you know. It's an individual contact has always been my most successful projects. And I often get calls, like, oh my gosh, there's a lot down the street, it's for sale, or it's just sold, and the developer's coming in, and can you do anything? It's like, no. I said I could talk to the, you know, if the person wants to talk to me, I'm more than willing, and I always put it in writing too. Happy to talk to, I'm not aware of this, it's a conservation project, but happy to talk to them about it. And I think once in the last 20 years, I ended up talking to them and they conserved it. The others, another time I talked to them and they're like, yeah, no, I love developing, I love doing this. It's like, okay, nope. And you shake hands and you're, you know,
Especially
great
if they've already
friends.
seen what the developer's gonna give them.
Right.
Like when they've already seen
And I
that
th-
big number.
It's like, I can't compete with that.
You can't go back.
No, it's like, no worries. So twice.
I think where the conflict happens is where you try to convince them to put part of it in conservation, for an approval, like, that's how it's perceived anyway.
Oh.
So we'll approve your project with those impacts to the wetland as long as you do this. Like, that's where the conflict would happen. So you can't get in
Oh.
that situation, and
Yeah.
that we've always been careful not to even go near the conservation piece while they're in the middle of a planning process, because it could be perceived that way, or who knows what's gonna happen with the development.
So you don't, okay.
But I'm sure there's cases where they could come before the Conservation Commission, and then someone outside the commission, hopefully, tells them, you could put that in, they might give you money for conservation, would you consider talking to them? And they'd have to, I think, either stop their development or say,
Yeah, it's
but
ba-
once
after-
it's in the middle of a development process, it gets tricky.
All that money spent on
spent
engineering and.
They've already
whatnot.
spent a
No,
lot of
once
money,
you
yeah.
can't,
Yeah.
You can't
let them
go
down that
backwards. So
path.
why wouldn't it be, so this is why I'm not on the Conservation Commission. So when you first hear about it, you're not allowed as a Conservation Commission to suggest conserving some of it, like, no, well, yeah, see, I don't know your
I
rules.
think it
That's
just
the
gets tricky.
question.
That's, I think every case is different. It's more the,
Like, more transparent than kind
Yeah.
of sneaking it in. I would never want to, everything has to be so up and transparent. I've learned that.
I mean,
don't
if you know the person's not gonna sue you for having that conflict, then you're
So
fine, but you
it's-
never know that.
So you're
you
not
kinda have to be
allowed to
careful.
suggest conserving it at the,
I think
As
what,
part of
what
the
our,
conservation
what
con-
our legal
con-
department has said is that if you're in the middle of a development review,
oh,
then you shouldn't talk to them about, either getting their approval based on conserving part, somehow getting,
oh, right.
making a
Quid pro
conservation,
quo.
like a quid pro quo, that's what
gotcha,
you're trying to
gotcha.
avoid.
I understand.
Right when they submit an
So-
application, then it's off limits, kind
And
of.
so right when they submit an application, it kind of is like, well, it's not a great time to talk about
Got
that.
it. Okay,
It can
that
be
makes
perceived
sense.
that way, or,
I know.
Why is that different from the compensatory measures that we suggest?
like what?
Like, not developing beyond this, or using specific plants to redo it, or what was the latest one?
Because you're trying to preserve the ecological conditions, I think,
Yeah,
is more
well,
fitting, even
and
with
the easement is doing the same.
I suppose. You could talk to the legal department.
No, I'm
I
trying
mean,
to understand.
No, I know.
Voting?
I think there probably are cases where you could have that conversation, but I think we've tried to keep it really separate, so you don't have that situation
course,
where
yeah.
you're having
They're
a
actually-
lawsuit over it.
They're also losing their property if they're putting it in conservation, like, that's a complete.
Right.
They don't
Loss
lose
of-
property, they lose the right to develop.
Right,
on
right,
Yeah.
their
but
property.
that's different than, I guess, well, yeah, I don't know, it's different.
But, that's where you could get into transfer of development rights and actually transferring.
Oh,
the
I was just
development
gonna say,
rights
that
of
sounds
the
like
property.
Yeah.
giving more
It is.
density
That's
in
where-
exchange for
that's
conservation
where-
land,
Yeah,
yeah.
if we had
Goes-
formally created it, and here's a process you could take, that would be different, but it's more, I think it's more the negotiation to get the outcome they want, is where
Yeah.
the issue comes up. Like, if it becomes a negotiation for a land transaction that wasn't part of the original plan, but then the Conservation Commission came up with some scheme that would make them work, then that would be could be
So
perceived.
transfer of development rights.
But the transfer
Yeah.
development rights is like an established process that you'd go through, and they'd probably start that from the beginning, so.
You have to call, bye, good seeing you again.
But I think it's something that we should explore more and see how it's worked in Dover. One of the questions I had was, and maybe it's not anything to do with transfer development rights, is how many properties do you not, like, what percentage don't allow public access?
Oh, gosh.
I mean, in general,
Oh,
is it
well-
common?
It's not that they don't allow it, it's not mandated. Like, the landowner might allow it, but we don't mandate it in the conservation easement deed, like you must.
They could stop it.
Yes.
They still own that, the
Right.
rights to
So
that.
it's actually, the ones that are mandated are like the LCHIP funded grants,
Yeah.
because they require public access. Fish and game, you gotta allow fishing and gaming. And then there were a couple, it's a small percentage that it's mandated.
But you don't, when you negotiate with a landowner to protect the property,
They decide.
one of your criteria isn't public access,
No,
and you don't add that. So they could at any time say, no trespassing?
right, yeah. I do get a sense of, so, how do you feel about public access? I'll ask that. And they're like, I don't want anyone comes here, I'm gonna have a shotgun in their face. Or, oh, people use this all the time, they're dog walkers, there's a covered bridge over here, whatever. And So I make a note that landowner is not opposed to public access. So when I go before the city council, I can say, well, this current landowner is not opposed to it, they're not planning on shutting it down or posting. However, it's not mandated in the conservation easement deed, so 100 years from now, then a new landowner might post it, but we hope that historically they'll keep it open.
Yeah.
And so who owns the liability if anything happens on that conservation easement when there was public access allowed?
The landowner, well, the landowner is, what's that RSA, is not liable. No one's liable supposedly if someone unless you have like a, I don't know,
Amusement park or something.
razor blade.
A nuisance, if you create the nuisance.
If you create, we had a
Yeah.
landowner that created a nuisance. He put a wire across his
Ooh.
thing because he didn't want, remember that? The snowmobilers. And we're like, dude, you cannot do this. Someone's going to get their head lopped off on the snowmobile. And he was sick of people coming up to his driveway to access the property when it was supposed to be out somewhere else. And, oh, it was a nightmare. But liability, there's an RSA that says if someone is recreating on someone else's
At their
private
own
land,
risk.
the landowner's not liable.
It's like a ski area.
Ski area, yeah,
Same
yeah, I
thing.
forget the RSA, I used to have it memorized. But yeah, so if they open it up to, as long as they're not getting paid for it, like they can't charge. If they're charging for, I don't know, something, then they might be liable. And I have not read the laws on that.
And that's really inviting, I think, is that you don't require that, because, I mean, we have a piece of property that has an easement on it, and people have hunted there for years, and it's up to us whether or not we allow the
Yeah.
hunting. And so we're gonna wait and see, and,
Yeah.
you know, and if people start abusing it, then we still have that option to post it, and that's really freeing, I think,
Yeah,
as far as.
yeah.
you
And
know.
I have found that with hunting and hunters, they're some of the best caretakers of the land, whereas sometimes in March during mud season, folks on the ATVs,
Ooh.
or what do you call, oh my gosh, it's a nightmare.
Four-wheelers, yeah.
Yeah, all terrain vehicles, it's a mess. And there are fewer and fewer places for people to hunt in the traditional way and all that. So we do ask sometimes, you know, how people feel about hunting. I think I've had one landowner who said, I never, ever want to have hunting on this property when I'm dead and gone. So we had to put it in the deed, or it was a deal breaker. But that's one in 22 years.
I think that could get contentious in terms of people wanting to be able to access it. If they're gonna spend city funds, they're gonna wanna be able to go on the property.
Right. It could, yeah. The property in Sandburnton, they allow hunting, and they have traditionally and it's been farms, this family's had it since the 40s, but it's been in production enough as a farm since the 1800s, and hunting and fishing, there's a pond too, is a huge part of the identity of that family's farm, so I don't see that going away anytime soon, but I also have not mandated it. Oh, no, we do have to if we get LCHIP money.
To mandate hunting and fishing.
Yeah, that's right. So, which will be announced on December 11th.
Well, it's allowed on our big city-owned pieces. but
It is, yeah.
Public access and hunting and fishing. There's only one piece that I know of that doesn't allow public access through, and it was the old LCHIP grant program.
Oh, yeah, LCIP, the
Yeah,
precursor, yeah.
The property owner didn't want to allow it, and they don't have public access. But
Ah.
it's a really nice parcel and provides great conservation values. But I think a lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah.
You know, you're not just conserving it so people can go walk on it. You're
Right.
conserving it for the natural resource value.
Yeah, that is something sometimes that's difficult to articulate in a public setting, especially if sometimes there are angry people in your face. But I've had to explain, well, it's not just, you know, they're like, well, what's the public getting out of it if you can't walk on it? I said, well, you like turning your faucet on and having clean drinking water. With all the floods we had last year, you know, flood mitigation and pollutant attenuation helps with all the, you know, if you don't develop and everything along the river or whatnot. It's sometimes difficult to articulate, but then once you list them, they're like, oh, okay, I guess you're benefiting even though you're not walking on the property. And there are, plenty in Dover that are walkable,
Mhm.
whether they're
Yeah.
mandated or not. There's plenty that are available for walking. So I was just gonna, one of the questions you listed were, or that you emailed to me was like, how much is conserved? And I forgot to bring that chart, but Jackson just emailed it to me.
Do we
How
have a
many
chart
acres?
for Portsmouth of how much is conserved and?
We've got, in the open space plan, it's listed. Yep.
Acres. So,
I don't know how
well,
many, 1,000 maybe? I don't know. off the top
about
of my head.
885. Seems more than that, but, wow.
Yeah, maybe ours has to be updated because we've gotten so many since the open space plan came out. Or not
Yeah,
so many,
we've
but
gotten a couple,
few.
big ones,
Oh, you have?
through an open space subdivision
Oh,
process.
nice.
Yep.
Nice.
And we added public access into those, and the developer agreed to it, fortunately, but.
Nice,
yeah.
nice.
They're not, some of them aren't that easy to get to, but.
Hmm.
But someday, there might be a trail that goes through. It just seems to me like if the developer will agree to it, then it seems like a good,
Did he build it? Is it done? Is it built?
one's being constructed, one's done.
Okay.
One's like a 20 lot subdivision that had a big piece of wetland and some upland, but hard to access from a development
Yeah.
standpoint, so they didn't care about it so much, but it was part of their parcel.
Hmm.
Same thing with the other one. It has a big wetland area and then another big upland area, but you couldn't get to the big upland area, so
Right.
they conserved all that.
Good.
And they got to build, more density, and they could build closer together than our zoning would allow otherwise
Right.
because of that conservation part.
Got it,
So-
got it. Yeah, that makes sense. But if they agreed to do the trail, it's usually better to do it before they leave, before the developer's gone.
Oh, yeah. They did build a trail as part of it, as
Oh,
one of
they
them.
did?
But the other one doesn't have any trails. But
Okay.
but it says in the easement that public access is allowed, so.
Okay, all right, all right. Point I was gonna make was that the most critical time, though, is like when you're first talking to a landowner. That'll set the tone for the, like, an inquiry can come through City Hall, or it might come through a volunteer or whatnot, and setting those expectations in the beginning and not offering a price, or we're not in a position to offer a price, we don't even know what it's worth. And listening to all their questions and concerns. And I usually have an answer to their concerns, but sometimes it's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I don't know, I can't think of one right now, but, and like I said, well, I'll get back to you. Well, take it to the committee. But usually, if they really are connected to that property and are determined to conserve it, it'll happen. I've had some where I was just short on the money. There were no grants. It was supposed to be like $800,000, and I had $789 or whatever. And they agreed. They're like, you know what, cash in hand, rather than slogging through to try to get the rest of it, they accepted the lesser amount, the bargain sale, if you will. So it usually happens if they really want to conserve it. If it's just for the money, that's a little more difficult.
Mhm.
But yeah, my favorite part is always the initial meeting with the landowner. That's and the closing, everything in between is like, oh my gosh, nightmare.
Sure.
So and you have to have all your ducks in a row as a open lands committee before you meet with, like, you have to know all those little nuances
Yes,
about how.
yeah. Yeah, and and some people are better at certain parts of it than others. And I might have mentioned this, I said, I noticed that people who have been in sales, I used to be a financial advisor, and I was in sales for a long time. Well, not a long time, 7 years until my daughter was born. You learn how to talk to people, and I didn't know a thing about water quality or forestry or any of that. I learned that later through extension. But that comes into play all the time. That and the behavioral science courses. I had one guy that knew everything about water and water quality and that, but horrible talking to landowners, and it was not Dave. It was, yeah, I was like, I'm gonna stop taking him, because he would talk about the committee and what we did and what we wanted to do, and the people are like, glazing over it. They didn't
Yeah.
want to know about
They don't care about that.
wildlife habitat. Well, I mean, they did maybe, but they want to know, I want to know, what's your goal and can you help, what's my goal? Can you help me get there? That's what they want to know. Not that you don't articulate why you're going to conserve their property or work to help them or not, but, yeah. So you're down 3 people?
But what?
You're down 3 people, Sam said. Did 3 people quit?
2 people.
2, oh. All right, all right. 449.
So you're wondering who the 2 people were?
What's that?
Like, what? Sorry?
Oh, you weren't here, were you?
No, I wasn't there.
Oh,
Oh,
my
no.
gosh. Oh.
And Abigail.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Did I spill the beans?
No, she was open about it. I think she said something at the beginning. I didn't hear, I guess, but she said it at the beginning of the meeting.
Abigail.
Oh, that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Out of frustration? Oh,
No, she's moving.
okay.
Oh, yeah, that's a pretty good reason.
Yep.
Yeah.
When Dave Price left Dover, we were so sad.
I bet.
He was the easement monitoring team leader.
Yeah.
Oh, he was good. I mean, miss him.
He misses you guys.
So I know I threw a lot at you, but there is a lot to it, and,
Well, how do we start if we want to do this? Because we want to talk about whether or not we want to do it, right, Peter? Is that what you were thinking?
I guess, what do you want, I mean, I
That's the
think
big
the
piece.
key message I'm receiving from all this is that they have a subcommittee that works on this.
Yeah.
Because it's always been the challenge to try to do Conservation Commission work and then try to do something else. You know, we
Yeah.
can do a couple meetings to get something done, but to
It-
have a ongoing project like this, like you do in Dover and you have,
It-
then it's hard.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know. My experience has been that I don't think there's as much land here that people want to conserve, just the nature of Portsmouth
Mm-hmm.
and the way it is, but maybe that's, you know, having a couple workshops and finding
Yeah.
out, maybe that committee starts up and does some things and decides after a year, no, there's not a lot of people out there, we'll do it we'll meet at, you know, or maybe their frequency of meeting is less
Right,
because there's
right.
not as much activity, but it does seem like it'd be nice if there was a place people could go to talk to a volunteer who works on this, rather than
Right.
someone who works at the city, which is probably
yes,
helpful.
that is, you're absolutely
know,
correct. I
Because
found-
you know, they might not want to talk to me or the planning department about conserving their property because of
Yeah.
what happened to them in the past or whatever,
Thank
you know, you never know.
Exactly.
But,
Yeah. And I have to admit, we did start that subcommittee, but Amanda Stone, who just retired
Yeah.
from Extension, she was with NROC at the time, Natural Resource Outreach Coalition, and she came and facilitated the beginning for us. 'cause
Oh,
we did
nice.
not know what
Yeah.
we were doing. And she was awesome, and got us started for, I forget if it was 5-6 months. I think she was part of that criteria process. Then she's like, I'm out of here. You're on your own. And then she helped us with the workshops that we did
Yep.
the following year, a few years. So it helped facilitate a few of the things, and then, but I would suggest maybe a subcommittee, and we didn't meet every month at first because we didn't have anything to do, which is kind of shocking now. Look at what's left in Portsmouth without looking at the
That
landowner.
was going to be my first question.
Yeah, don't look.
Before we start
yeah,
the
without
committee.
looking at the landowner, who owns it, or maybe she's interested, don't look at the landowner, like, what would we want to conserve today that's
Right.
available right now?
Right.
And
And and a lot of that is in the open space plan.
and why?
But
Yeah.
that could be done, you know, at a finer scale even
Yeah.
than the open space plan, because that looked at
With
bigger parcels.
criteria.
Yeah,
But,
and then, and if it's not that I mean, we had to do the criteria just because we had it's an embarrassment of riches in this region, you know, it's like, well, what do we want to conserve? You can make a very simple one, you know, just articulate what your goals are, you know, water supply, flood mitigation, you know, the oceans, you know, coming up into your properties, whatnot. But I would formulate a plan, like, okay, so at the top of our list is this region. Who knows whom, and how best to reach out to this person without, you know, having them feel like a target. No one wants to be a target. They don't want a map at City Hall with a pin on it. It's like, we want to conserve this property.
Right,
That
yeah, that's why I
it's,
think that
no. Mm-hmm. Uh,
list of priorities would be a better way to think about it.
And then,
Better way to think about it.
and then, uh,
Better way to think about it.
and then, like, we actually had like a plan, like, you talk to these two people, I'll talk to, and then we met the following month, like, did you reach someone? It takes months sometimes to reach somebody, or get a response, flyers on the car, you know, we tried all sorts of things. After a few years, we didn't have to do that anymore, people were calling, they knew, to reach out, and I had a landline at the time, so my phone was ringing a lot. So yeah, start with, so what is still available to conserve that's worthy of conservation? Because there are a lot of undeveloped parcels that would not be. And look at, you know, who owns them, and does anyone know them? And then have a, like, we had a little, I didn't bring my little brochure, Dover Open Lands Committee brochure, like, you know, ever thought of conserving your land? Or Extension has 100 different little things that you could print off. Contact, you know, I'm not a marketing person, but, you know, make.
I wonder if there's still any kind of support, like an NROC or a program that could support.
I think so.
a subcommittee.
Yeah.
I haven't heard much lately about that kind of support, but
They,
Yeah.
not, well, what did she, they kind of folded it into Amanda's job, and now that she retired, I think they have to hire like 3 people to
Yeah.
fill her shoes.
well, Cooperative Extension has lots of stuff going on, so maybe that's
They
the place
have
to
a
start.
lot going on, so I
Yeah.
don't know,
Could ask Cooperative Extension, they would.
yeah.
Oh, and that's right, the nature groupie
All right.
people are part of Cooperative Extension.
And then the whole thing with the, I forget what it was called, it's called Great Bay 2020 or whatever.
Mhm.
There was, I mean, there's money and they're paying for staff. So-
Yeah. I mean, I do that kind of work as a consultant, but it kind of, you have more resources with Extension and some of those groups that are already doing it. And also, I just started a new part-time job. I'm supposed to work 8 to 12:30. I just started last week, but I'm working a lot. I'm the new executive director at Our Place, New Hampshire, in Dover.
Oh.
We're trying to establish housing for adults with developmental disabilities. 'Cause
Great.
there is none
Wow.
in New Hampshire.
Wow.
So I've been on the ground floor of Stratford Rivers Conservancy. I was their first ED. No staff, no office.
Called Our Place, OUR Place,
OUR, Our Place, NH.
NH, cool.
.org. And we have a property that we're leasing to buy, and we had a little meet and greet, meet the new executive director, and this one young man, oh my gosh, I know, I digress, but he had never been there. He's one of the children of the board members who is in a wheelchair. And he goes, wait, this might be our place? And he just was like, I was like, oh my gosh, it was really inspiring. But anyway, so, all to say, I would offer my services, but I just started last week, and I'm finding I'm working there more than I thought. So I would try other channels of folks that have resources, whatnot, and honestly, if that doesn't pan out, I'll absolutely make time for you. But I would start with Extension and that other group you mentioned, yeah.
And the people that you had on the committee were like people that just were interested in doing it, kind of? I forget, because I remember going to.
Oh, how did I
meetings.
get people on the committee?
Yeah, they kind of went to some of the
Oh,
events,
God.
right?
How to get people on the town.
Compromising photos, no.
What was their incentive package, right? Yeah.
No, oh, God, it's a challenge keeping people on, actually. That's, sometimes landowners that I've worked with, their son or daughter will be like so inspired that they'll join. Extension, I went through the New Hampshire Coverage Project training and the Natural Resources training, so that's how I got on the list. It's like, oh, you have training in this. I'm like, woo. Yeah, Extension has a list of people in Dover, you know, every town has volunteers that went through a variety of training,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's how I got started in this.
Like, because,
Natural Resource Stewards.
yeah,
I think.
because that's how Kate got
Yeah.
on
So I went through
Other
the
Kate.
first Natural Resources Stewards class in
Yeah.
19.
Oh, yeah, Kate did that.
92. Yeah. Was it 92? Yeah. Yeah, we are always looking for volunteers, and it's always a challenge. And, like, you know, the same 4 people out of a 12-member group are always doing all the work, so. But I found out that if I step back and say, sorry, I learned how to say no, someone else will do it, usually.
usually.
So, yeah, recruiting volunteers, I don't know, I have to take a workshop on that, because I need more. So, we've covered a lot, and I appreciate your attention, but, and I'm happy to come back again.
This is great.
Not as a consultant, just to kind of fill you in on, you know, once you you go through your list, who knows whom, how do we reach out to them, do we have a little, you don't need a big flyer or a booklet like this, just, hey, have you ever thought of it, and ways to reach out, and then can we follow up, that's what you always ask before you leave, can I follow up with you in a month or a week or whatever, and then follow up. And but it's gonna be who knows them, that's always helpful, and if not, you send them mail or something, I don't know what I get so many phone calls now that I don't have to do that anymore.
Great.
But, yeah, and then regroup and decide who's gonna do what, and, but then you need someone to go on that first meeting with the landowner, that's gonna be critical. Because you have to answer a lot of tough
We're not there
questions.
What?
you know.
We're not there yet.
What's that?
We're
We're not
starting from the
there yet.
ground.
No.
We'll have to work it out, but we're
Well,
not there
actually,
yet.
well,
A lot of
Maybe
work
we
to
could have
do.
you go to one meeting with 2 other people or something, and then we all know
I've
how
done
to
that.
do it.
I've done that for the couple cities, towns I work for, where the Conservation Commission members are like, oh, I can't do this. So I'll go, do this whole thing, kind of get the ball rolling, maybe 2 more, and then it's like, well, John here is going to be your main contact, and I kind of back off. And then I'm available, like, on a retainer, you know, and I don't charge the whole thing ever. It's a phone call. What do I do? But, yeah, I've done that. It's mostly like Farmington, a few years ago, Rochester, I forget where else, some towns. What was it? Oh, yeah, another town. They did the opposite of what I told them to do, and I was like, well, you might want to do this, 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 and this, and this, and they decided not to. And then I said, well, I forget what I quoted, I don't know, $2,000 or something to kind of finish the project, which might be 6 months, 12 months. They didn't. They ended up spending $15,000 for an attorney to undo what they did.
Oh, yeah, that's what we're worried about.
Yeah.
That was
You are.
kind of,
No, I'm not worried about that, but that's what we worry about with the conflict of, well, why don't you put it in conservation, or we'll approve it if you put it in you know.
yeah, I wouldn't say we'll approve it if you put it in
Yeah,
conservation.
exactly.
Ever.
No, I think everybody knows that.
What not
but-
to say.
Yeah, that's the fear.
But before that, if you could mention it, but, so, yeah, so find other people first, but this part, that is kind of, Jackson has gone with me a couple times, and we get back in the car, back to City Hall, he's like, wow, you know your stuff when it comes to that. I'm like, well, I've been doing it for a long time. I didn't, when I first started, I think I went with Phil Ozier or somebody else, and I was like, doesn't come naturally, let's say that. I had to kind of like practice, so, but, yeah. So I'll let you guys go, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We really
5 o'clock.
appreciate you
My
coming
husband's
in.
like,
Yeah.
when's dinner? No, I'm kidding. Oh, I love talking about this, as you know. I prefer this to PowerPoints. Oh, and then